Well, welcome everybody. Real glad to have you all here this morning. My name's Dusty Katzenmiller, and we're going to get started on our Lenten study for this year, looking at Padre Gotuma and his community's spirituality of conflict. So I think what we can do is maybe look at our lectionary text for Ash Wednesday, and then for the first Sunday of Lent, and then we'll have some conversation around what we hear in those readings. And I might ask for a volunteer. We've got reading from Matthew 6 on page 2, if someone would be willing to read us through that passage of Scripture.
I'll read it. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you that they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go to your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees you in secret will reward you. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and sneak and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
And then we have our reading for today from Mark chapter 1 over on page 6 of our packet, if I could request someone to read that for us.
I'll read it. In those days Jesus came to Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased." And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. Now after John was arrested, Jesus came to Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God and saying, "The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe in the good news."
All right, so we can now kind of backtrack in our packets. And we can, let's see. Well, we'll just stay close to page 6. How about that? So for Ash Wednesday, the point is made that there's a call to quietude and a call to action, I guess. And for our author here, the first two readings really go well together. So I might request that y'all kind of talk out loud and kind of brainstorm a little bit about what you hear this second gospel reading saying about taking time alone. I feel like that may be a different way of reading that text. So over on page 7, he says that the public affirmation of chosenness drove Jesus to solitude, and the public demonstration of corruption, John's arrest, drove Jesus to action. So I wonder if any of you all have kind of read the text in that way, if you can hear that internal conflict, that internal struggle to receive public affirmation and then to act on behalf of justice. Just kind of brainstorm together about what you're hearing in these words.
Well, Jesus frequently went off by himself to pray and be alone with the Father. So my thoughts are that you need that strength and that guidance before you take action.
Yeah, and I think the point in our packet is made about Ash Wednesday is that the invitation to kind of create an inner life that helps drive that outer life and outer action. Yeah.
Dusty, I think, I hadn't really thought about it in these terms, but our ego is so powerful that when somebody starts praising us or telling us, affirming us, the temptation is to bathe ourselves in that luxury, to feel really good about ourselves. And this might be calling us to say, rather than just immediately embracing all of that good feeling, maybe we need to go off and think about what made somebody say that about us. What can we learn about it? Where is it true? Where is it not true?
Yeah.
To do some self-examination as opposed to what our ego would typically drive us to do.
Yeah, I really appreciate
I
that.
want to piggyback on that, and that by having the solitude and the unity with God and letting that give us our satisfaction.
Yeah. More substantively, maybe.
Yes.
We live in a real extroverted world that is very outward and very busy and is somewhat suspicious of the inner world.
Mm-hmm.
And so one has to be almost countercultural to develop a strong inner world
Yeah.
and be weird.
Yeah. And I think culturally we're so often invited to bask in that, in the affirmations that we, and even create some affirmations for ourselves, yeah. So what are some experiences with silence or solitude or quiet that folks have had that might give some context for that reflective work or kind of working through what our ego messages might be, to use Jerry's word?
One of my spiritual I hate to be the one talking, but everybody's sitting here, so maybe other people join me. One of my spiritual practices is to meditate every morning and every night. And that provides a calm and a peacefulness, and it allows that to be carried, hopefully, at least partially through my day, so that I'm not as reactive. It provides a space between the stimulus and the response. So if something happens that might trigger me, that I can pause for a second rather than just jumping in and maybe saying something that I'll regret later.
Yeah, so in that I hear that the practice of meditation helps you pause even in the moment of stimulus.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that connects with that Ash Wednesday reading and the invitation that we're given to let those moments of quietude or reflection kind of help form us into persons that can be more open to hearing the other person. And he uses the language of kind of seeing each other face to face, like look at the other person instead of being in that reactive place and defensiveness or however that might manifest. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts about maybe just outworkings of your own personal spirituality and how that helps you become a person who can practice kind of intentionally who Jesus calls us to be?
Well, I was thinking, when you're talking about making quiet time, I have 2 young kids and a puppy and a husband, so there's not very much quiet time. But sometimes I'll just even like drive with the radio or, podcast off, and just that can be my quiet time, or, walking the dog or working out, and that just gives me time to just kind of like reflect on like what's going on.
Yeah, I can really connect with the kids always being loud and the dogs always kind of creating havoc.
And it does get you so stimulated. Talking about stimulation response. I'm like always on edge,
Yeah.
ready to, because of just all the outward stimulation at all times. I feel like here.
Because you don't have the time to ground yourself
Yeah.
so you can deal with it effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being there.
Any other thoughts on what you're hearing in this gospel reading for the day?
I think the hard part about it is, to me, the easy part is being quiet. The hard part is coming out and standing up for, that Jesus came out to back up John.
Yeah.
That's where it gets hard.
Yeah, I think of the word balance. And balance, I think, in general is hard for me at times. But then, yeah, especially when we're talking about moving between contemplation and action, to kind of use that framework, that willingness to be active and speaking up and acting out on behalf of justice. I very much connect with that.
You really, you awoke me in that comment, because I'm, as an extrovert, I'm all about action and forcing myself to be quiet, as you all know, is that's the biggest challenge in my life. And so it was just the opposite of what you said. It was like, slowing down. So the whole introvert, extrovert personality type comes into play here, and obviously Jesus had both, and we have both. But finding that balance is really important, and I'm out of balance most of the time.
That action part is really important. We're supposed to love justice, right? And so how can you sit and be quiet when there's so much injustice in the world? We do need to vote, and we do need to take action, and I admire the things that Jerry has done in our community, because it's very much needed. I watched the new version of The Color Purple last night on Max, and it's just like, it just brought all of that stuff back that we're just not there.
Yeah, say a little bit more about that experience watching that last night.
Well, that also kind of followed. I attended the conference for the Speech and Hearing Association of Alabama last week, and there was a session on being, how did they word it? But it was about being aware of differences, and the presenter was a young African-American woman who was very intelligent, has her PhD in speech pathology, and just, but we were talking about social justice and seeing the other people, and then I watched that again last night, and growing up in Birmingham and all of the, I was 9 years old in 1963, and I see that we've made a lot of progress, but we're just not there yet. And if Jesus loved people who were quote unquote unlovable in his day, aren't we supposed to love everyone and at least acknowledge them, and that there should be civil liberties and that everyone should be treated equally in our society? That's what our Constitution says, and I tend to believe that. Not because, I've grown up an American, but primarily because that's what Jesus taught. My faith informs my political action. And, these movies and, sessions and things that you can, like this, that you can attend, hopefully helps to bring about that change.
Yeah.
As an older introvert who has limited energy, to see all this stuff out there that needs fixing, so what do I focus on? Because if I focus there, am I ignoring this, or I just get conflicted sometimes. So I only have so much energy.
At the minimum,
And
I
I'm
can vote.
well, I do that.
Yeah.
But that's nothing compared with what people need.
Yeah.
I don't mean nothing, but that's baby step one out of thousands of steps needed.
It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and sort of how to engage that overwhelm, I think, is part of the work of conflict in this idea of kind of inner conflict. but how someone says we have to separate what's interesting from what's important and kind of keep moving toward what's important and not get too distracted by what's interesting. And I find that really helpful to kind of remind myself of. Because there's so much of interest that might draw our attention, but how do we stay focused on what's important? Especially as we talk about this kind of inner life cultivation for outer life action.
Dusty, I like to think about behavior often as a continuum. And you have people, for example, looking at this second phrase here, the public demonstration of corruption. You have people that don't want to hear about anything that's happening in their society. Kind of hear no evil, see no evil. Then on the other end of the continuum, you have people that actually take action. And I was thinking about this morning when I was watching people demonstrating in front of the Kremlin after the murder of Alexei Navalny. And I was thinking, is it about a person who would demonstrate there, knowing that they're probably going to be arrested and taken away, as the video showed? What inspires that person to be that way versus someone else somewhere along the continuum? You know, I've written letters to congressmen and so forth and so on, but having lived through the whole civil rights era, I never demonstrated, never held a sign. So it's really interesting to me to think about that person that goes that next step, that really actively gets involved in a protest against corruption. And I don't know where that comes from, where that mindset comes from. I would not think that it's a spiritual issue, but it may be. There may be some spiritual component to that.
It is for me.
Yeah, I think imagination can be a really helpful tool for us. And so Charlie, I would invite you or anyone to kind of reflect aloud what you might imagine that difference being to get that next step into that space of action.
Well, those folks in Russia were actually putting their life on the line,
Yeah.
which would be the extreme end of that continuum.
But in America, we can, in this day and age, we can demonstrate with no negative consequences for the most part.
For the most part.
I before moving here, that there was that one year that there were a lot of demonstrations going on right after Trump was elected, and I demonstrated 5 times in Birmingham. I mean, several of them, we had like 5,000 people marching the streets with signs and cameras and police guarding us. And nothing bad happened, and we said our piece, and so it's, in Russia, of course, it's a lot more dangerous.
Absolutely.
But here, you know,
And most
we
parts of the
can.
world.
Yeah, a lot of places. But here we can.
I get concerned when these people that know what's best for everyone else start legislating what we can read and what we can do
Yeah.
under the name of God, that and it doesn't seem like a correct form of Christianity to me. And there's a huge conflicts that I have about that everybody under the Christian banner talking about how they know best, and I just that disturbs me greatly.
And then those who may think, feel, believe differently find themselves constricted or excluded. And in this place of maybe disorientation and confusion.
That concerns me too. That's taking away our liberties, taking away our freedom.
Definitely.
I think a lot of that goes under the old gang mentality. You may have a half dozen people who are really conscientious about what they're doing, and then you have 1,000 people that just want to be part of the demonstration with no real meaning to what they're doing. It's just being a part of something. So, but I think it's a gang mentality that causes a lot of people to be hypocrites in some of these actions.
Yeah, so that kind of transports me back to that reading for Ash Wednesday and that notion of our inner life being the place where we find reward as opposed to the action, I guess. Does that sound right with what the text is saying to us? Yeah, we can kind of sum up, returning to our packet on page 8, right above where it says response, that final paragraph in the section above. We've got the invitation from this week's gospel text is to an inner life that can listen to its own complexities and conflicts, shoring up wisdom, humility, and determination, from which our small works of love and justice can emerge. And so we've got Mark's gospel. I appreciate what he says up at the top of that page as well, where he talks about Jesus' company in the wilderness is the company of temptation, the company of angels, the company of wild beasts. In a way, this could be characterized as an inner voice, the experience of the earth, and the consolation of prayer. And I just really appreciate that kind of naming those three, temptation, angels, and wild beasts, as inner voice, consolation of prayer, and the experience of the earth. I don't know if that resonates with anyone or kind of what you might hear from that three-part classification.
How
I think
many
all
hours
of them
a
are
month?
me.
There you go, yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'm a wild beast. I mean, certainly we all have it all in us.
Yeah.
And how many of us are not consoled by a walk in the woods, to be in nature
Yeah.
and feel surrounded by God and creation?
Yeah, and so down in this section called response, they often will provide us some practices to follow up on. And so at the very bottom he says, as a response, consider the animals. You may live with some. Getting back to earlier conversation. But, so kind of this may be deviating somewhat from conversation so far, but what does nature, what does the walk in the woods, what do animals have to teach us about the inner life, do you think?
I believe the Spirit of God is in all of it, so the unity with God.
Well, if you own a dog, then you realize that they're always exactly the same. They never change. They're always happy to greet you. And you would think that if you could learn anything from owning a pet, is that you need to learn to be the same kind of a person, a good person all the time, be friendly to everybody, be kind to everybody, be loving to everybody, because that's what a dog is. I mean, they're always exactly the same. They're not moody, they're not pouty, they're not judgmental, they're not vindictive.
Based on anything going on around them, they're still the same.
They're glad to see you.
Yes.
Just about
Always.
everybody else,
Unconditional
unless
love.
they're bred differently or treated differently.
I think there's, from animals, I think there's an appreciation of what is offered, and there's an acceptance of that, and a working within that. But to that ineffable happiness. But those three things are what I take from it.
I think they're always like in the present. They're not like thinking about, what happened that morning or what's going to happen the next day.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, they're very much here and now.
There was also a balance. During COVID, I spent a lot of time working on my back porch and watching birds. And there were times of the day when they were always in the bird feeders. And then there were times of the day when they were not. They were resting up in the branches. And there was that balance between that we talked about earlier, about the time to rest and the time to be active. And I have no idea what goes on in a bird's brain, so I don't know if they're thinking about anything, though I have been accused of being a bird brain. I don't, but it just struck me, their patterns, and they keep first things first, clearly, and sometimes first thing is rest. Sometimes it's looking for food, and when you make the food available to them, it's interesting. If they didn't have the bird feeders around, they'd be looking for some food somewhere else. But with the bird feeders, they knew where the food was, so they could afford to have a balance. And so the call for me is, how do I provide food for folks so that they can, both literally and spiritually, food for those, so they can take the time to do the rest they need.
Yeah, I mean, in that I hear the nurturance of, so, I mean, community comes to mind, but I don't know if you would experience yourself as in community with the birds, but just how that, our environment can be nurturing for us.
Absolutely was.
Yeah, yeah. That's wonderful.
And that's why we need friends too, in groups like this, so we can nurture and support each other.
Back to Jerry and the birds and what I take from that, because I do that bit. But again, if you want, everything that they need is provided, everything. And they just go with that flow. Animals in general.
Yeah, and so now I'm taken back to the Sermon on the Mount, and not to be anxious over anything, because, which is a real important text for me personally.
Well, that nurturing aspect is really what's behind the use of horses for therapy with handicapped children, or even convicts. They've used for prisons. Have allowed people to go out and take care of a horse for a period of time, and it's a very nurturing exercise for them.
And they don't judge. Animals don't judge. There's that acceptance.
And riding them is actually good physical therapy for people with physical disabilities.
Right.
We have two indoor cats. They're 2 years old. We've had them since they were 8 weeks old. And the curiosity and the acceptance of, okay, we're indoor cats. So we find our joy wherever. And they have routines, and their clock is immaculate. They know exactly when it's time to eat, exactly when the TV's going to go off and we're going to play, because we're dull, routine kind of people. And so they have figured out our routine, so that becomes their routine. And they're just joyful, curious little critters, and so they encourage me to be joyful and curious.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Kind of seeing that joy and curiosity in yourself, and kind of am taken back to Jerry's words about myself being an animal, and wonder how we might become more animal-like as we're describing animals. That's kind of a weird phrase. But what might we be hearing as we talk about animals that we might want to kind of foster in ourselves?
Makes me think about being playful and getting back to my soul child, which is the divine within.
And I love
Because
that
there's
you.
no ego going on.
Yeah, I love that you connect the divine within with play, because I know I can get real serious. No, no need for comment. But I really connect with that idea of play and God. So thank you for that. What else might we be kind of inviting ourselves into as we talk?
Reciprocity. I mean, when that dog wags his tail, you pet it. When that horse nudges you, you groom her or him. So, yeah, we could reciprocate a lot more than we do. And when an individual, somebody gives you a compliment, then you reciprocate. If you're giving good service in a restaurant, give a better tip. The whole reciprocity idea of giving back, responding.
It's kind of a simplicity.
because it's very simple to do these things that animals do. They're thankful when you're kind. You're giving them what they need unless they're in nature and get it on their own. But it really takes you out and away from society and the demands and social media. There's good and there's bad in that. But a simplicity of how easy it is to love and be loved, especially by Christ.
Where the conflict comes, though, is when somebody's not being nice to you.
Yeah.
How do
Well,
you
therein
do?
lies my struggle.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I get confronted with people who just get up in my face on a fairly frequent basis, partly because of my new job, and it's to say, yeah, and bless your heart. It's hard. It is hard.
Yes, it is.
It is hard.
That loving your enemy part is really difficult. As some of the folks in the Bible study know, I've said 100 times, I don't even like a lot of them, and I'm supposed to love them. But then I realize I'm not called to like them. I'm called to love them, and so what does that mean for me? And for me, it means to want the best for them. And so it's easier for me to live into wanting the best for somebody than to have to like them.
Yeah, and I can connect kind of what Regina and Jerry, you're both saying. Just that idea of as I'm able to kind of love myself more, in this idea of inner life, like as I'm able to love myself more, I find more patience for those people who may be less liking of me. I just kind of connect your words, especially Regina, with that.
Does there come a time when you reach a tipping point? And you get out of that mode of being polite and so forth and just tell them what you really think? I mean,
I think the question is whether for me, when I give somebody hard news, or when I respond as forcefully as the initiator was, am I doing it out of love because I really want the best for them, or am I doing it to get back, to make my ego feel better, to win? If the goal is to win, you almost always pick the wrong path. If the goal is to love, and to want the best for, then it generally will, and I'm not real good at it, so I'm speaking hypothetically here. But I think it typically leads me to be more gentle in my tone, more talking less and listening more, asking questions as opposed to establishing myself as the expert. All of those things happen when I'm at my best, but I'm often not at my best.
That reminds me of disciplining children.
Yeah.
Are you trying to win and
Yeah.
make them do your will, or are you trying to love them and
Yeah.
guide
Exactly.
them? And it is much harder if you haven't slept and haven't eaten and
Right.
haven't had 1 second of quiet in days and
Yeah.
days. So when you're not at your best,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah, I just think about that, the word motivation comes to mind, and I know we're kind of running up on time here, but I might move us back to page 2 just to kind of wrap up, and to kind of connect with what Sarah and Jerry were sharing. That second full paragraph from the top, in conflict there are always stated goals and unstated interests. Mostly we are happy to state our goals. We want the conflict to improve, we want to restore, or we want a restoration to a proper order, etc. But it's the unstated interests that drive conflict. We want to win, we want to see someone's downfall, we want our reputation to increase, and so on. The lectionary texts for this week speak to this, calling the followers of the way to be people who are not seeking reward in the here and now, but rather are focused on living with an integrity today without hiding and without performing to a secret crowd whose adulation we desire. So I will let that paragraph kind of close us out. I'll open the floor for any last words or final thoughts.
Well, I recognize I'm still a work in progress.
Never arrive.
So, but I continue to try and be what I'm supposed to be, who I'm supposed to be. But just a lot of things that were brought up today, you can feel like you're on a very positive path, and it takes a split second for someone to really show you where you are or tempt you to be somewhere else.
Yeah, and in my world, we call those people good teachers. Yeah.
We're trying. There's when you're a kind of a fiery extrovert, it's hard to stop. More so with parents and grandparents rather than children. For some reason, I have a whole different set of patience with children than I do for people who should know better and do better.
Husbands, for example.
Stop. We can make it up close and personal. But I think this is a great place to end.
Well, thank y'all. I will respect those words, and we can conclude our time together this morning. And I think just as a close, I would like to read our prayer over on page 9. So if y'all would pray with me. Jesus of the wilderness, in a time of heightened tensions, you were driven to the wild, desolate lands with beasts, temptations, and dreams of angels. In all the tensions of our day, may we find small moments of reflection to guide us through this Lenten tide. May the tracks of the hare remind us of the wisdom of the hare. Be quick, watch out, don't forget to eat. May our work for justice be nurtured by the focus found in the wilderness. We ask this because you asked this. You needed this, so do we. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.